Hey guys, Matthew Palumbo from Audio Control here, and on today's workshop, we're going to take a look at how using the DMRTA, we can get the best factory signal out of your radio in your Jeep or truck. So when we're checking for usable signal, the first thing that we need to do is take the outputs from the radio that we are going to use and connect them to our DMRTA. Now in this case, I'm using my high-level input plug right here, and all I've done is taken the outputs from my Toyota Tacoma factory radio and fed them into the front left input. The next thing I'm going to do is play some pink noise. Now, it doesn't matter where the pink noise comes from. It could come from your smartphone over Bluetooth. It could come from a USB drive, a CD. The source is really not that important, although I do like to confirm with consumers or customers, what source do you use most often? If you use CarPlay all day, every day, and that's kind of all you use, then I'm going to want to play my pink noise over CarPlay. If your customer says that they use Bluetooth most often, well, then hey, let's make sure we play the pink noise over Bluetooth. So in this case, this radio has Bluetooth audio. That's what my customer uses most often. So that's what I'm going to use to play my pink noise. Your next question may be, where do I get the pink noise from? Well, you can either pull it from sources like Spotify, Apple Music, or even from, YouTube if you absolutely had to. I wouldn't recommend it. And after that, once we've got our pink noise testing playing, we are ready to jump into testing. All right, so when we're verifying that we have the signal we need, first things first, we need to get that pink noise playing. So let's go ahead and tap play. All right, now we've got our pink noise playing, and immediately on the RTA, we can see what we have going on here from the outputs of the radio. Now, if it's running off the top of the screen, like you can see it here a little bit, you may want to increase your vertical scale, like I just did. And if none of them are perfect, like in this example, 60 dB sensitivity on my vertical scale makes the signal kind of low down here, but 50 dB makes it a little high. What I can do is leave it on 50 dB, but up at the top, just bring this line level input down just a smidge, just so that now we can see our entire signal. So now what we're going to do while we're looking at the signal is look for a couple of things. One, if I'm only installing a base package, let's just use that as an example. I'm going to want to only really pay attention to the frequencies below, say, 125 hertz. So in this case, first things first, is there signal below 125? Yes, there is. But the next part of that is it usable signal? Is it crossed over? Is it rolled off? Is it volume variable? What do we have going on? So I'm going to decrease the volume on my factory radio and bring it down a little bit and see what that signal does as I increase volume. Because at lower volumes, this signal appears to be pretty flat. Now remember, when playing pink noise, this is essentially every frequency played at the same time at the same level. So it essentially sounds like static. What it should visually represent as on the RTA is all of my little vertical blue bars should be approximately more or less flat, meaning each signal is played at about the same level. Now keep in mind, nothing is ever really truly perfectly flat, but it should be more or less flat. Now what I always do is slowly increase my volume and take a look at that left side of the RTA. See if, does this vehicle have bass roll off? Is there a permanent EQ? What do we have going on? Now I'm going to jump up my vertical scale here again a little bit so I can see it. And what we can notice is that there is definitely some information kind of missing down here in these lower frequencies. Now, the other side of this is maybe we are doing more than just a base package. Maybe we're installing a 5-channel amp or a full range system. In that case, I want to make sure that whatever signal I'm planning on tying into for my source signal has the information I need at least. So in this case, let's say we're using this signal to run to the inputs of my 5-channel amplifier. I would want to make sure that this at least is full range and has bass, mid-range, and treble, which it does. So the next thing I always like to do when verifying a signal is check for clipping. So to do this, we want to use a test tone rather than pink noise. You're going to use the exact same connections, so we're still going speaker level out from our factory radio to the input of our DMRTA. Now, when we do that, like I said, we're going to want to play a test tone. Which test tone do we use? Well, it kind of depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a full range system, you're going to want to change or select a higher frequency. If you're doing just a base add-on package, you would want to use a lower frequency. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated. We just want to choose a frequency that is something that the speaker we are going to install is going to play. So for example, again, if you're doing a subwoofer, we would want to choose a frequency below, say, 80 hertz. If it's a full range speaker and we're tying into those channels, we would want to play something like a 1 kilohertz test tone. So in this instance, I'm going to show you both. So right now we have a 1 kilohertz test tone, or 1000 hertz, playing, and my volume is set pretty low on my factory radio. Now, one other thing that we should always look at on these radios is, where are the factory settings? So if I go into my audio menu and go into sound, I can see that treble, mid-range, and bass are all at 0 or flat. So let's go ahead and increase our volume on the factory volume knob, and let's see at what point does this radio clip. Now, for those that don't know, clipping is going to be these little kind of flat portions at the top and bottom of the wave. Now, this is not too bad. This is more or less a clean signal. You'll see it come back and disappear as the track repeats, by the way. But you'll see these little bits of flat spots or squiggly spots at the tops and bottoms. That's the beginnings of clipping or distortion. Now, something I want you to notice, though, is right now our volume on our radio is up to max, and we still have a pretty usable signal. Now, what happens if those audio settings weren't at 0? If we go to audio and we go to sound and I start to jack up my settings here, let's see how much of a difference it makes. Now, for this 1 kilohertz test, it made a little bit of a difference. You can see that the clipping is a little worse than it was before, but it's not horrible, right? So let's put these all back down to 0. And now let's play a different test tone. So now I'm going to play a 40 hertz test tone and take a look at this as if I was installing a subwoofer. So let's turn our volume back down. I'm going to change my settings on here. On the DMRTA, we're going to want to switch to the time base of 5 so we can see the entire wave on the screen. And I'm going to now start to bring up my volume. Again, we're playing a 40 hertz tone, and there we start to hit some pretty heavy clipping and distortion. If I back this down a bit, I would say my maximum usable volume on this radio is right at about 50 is going to be our max usable volume. Now, remember, we've zeroed out all the settings. So what happens to this signal if I don't have those settings zeroed out? First, let's look at what happens when we go past 50. Let's go all the way up to max volume. That is a horribly clipped signal. That is pretty much a square wave. You are just begging to blow up some woofers. So let's turn this back down. And again, let's go into our sound settings. And let's turn the bass all the way up, like so many customers love to do. You know what? A lot of customers love to just jack all those settings up. So let's turn those all up. And now let's turn this up and see where we get on our volume before it starts to clip. So now we're hitting clipping at about 42, 43. So if we go up to our previous 50, look how unusable that is. All because the customer had the settings turned up all the way. Now, what if we go all the way up on the volume? It's pretty awful. It's pretty much completely unusable. So just a good reminder to what a difference it makes when we, have those settings zeroed out. Now, my piece of advice here is if you pull a vehicle into the install bay and those settings are all maxed out, what do? Do you zero them all out and hope for the best? Or do you try to educate your customer on why they don't need to mess with those? How do you approach this? My thought is if all of the settings on the radio look something like this when the vehicle comes in, I'm going to have a conversation with the customer and kind of feel them out and see if I can convince them to, either leave those controls alone or leave them close to the 0 point. Maybe up or down 1 or 2, that's fine. But if they're maxing those settings out constantly, it's because they're trying to get something out of that radio, right? They're trying to change their sound. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you think that they're not going to change their mind and they're going to max those settings out anyway, then you may want to do this testing with those settings where the customer had them and use that for your results. So if you have a customer that does like to max out those settings and they're going to do this no matter what, well, then guess what? Our max volume on this radio is now officially going to be about 42. Anything above that, and we start to clip. So now instead of getting my customer to be able to go up to volume 50 out of the 60 maximum, now they're only going to get to go to about 40, 42, somewhere in there. So keep that in mind. So when making the decision on whether to use a aftermarket amplifier's high-level input section or using an off-the-shelf kind of low-cost passive line output converter, or going, and using a active LOC, this is really where it counts. We want to see what type of voltage do we have to work with coming out of this system, and what do the connected accessories need to be able to handle. So when I turn up the volume on this radio, remember, we're playing a test tone. I'm playing a 40 hertz tone right now. Let's say I'm about to do a amp and subwoofer install in this vehicle. What I'm going to do is I already found out what my max volume was. Right now, my audio settings are at flat, where hopefully I can get my customer to kind of leave them. And I'm going to turn my volume back up to 42, which was the max volume that was unclipped. So coming out of this radio, I have about a 2-volt signal coming out. So not a lot. It's a pretty weak signal. What this tells me is in this particular vehicle, I could probably get away with just using the built-in high-level input section of most amplifiers. However, that doesn't solve one of the problems that we saw earlier, which was that pretty steep bass roll-off on the low-end frequencies. So next, let's take a look at how to fix it. So now it's time to correct that messy factory signal. What I'm going to do for this step is use the RTA function of my DMRTA, as well as a pink noise track on repeat. So I've got my pink noise track already playing, as you can see. And remember, my settings are zeroed out, so everything is at flat. Now, let's bring our volume back up to where we found before was our previous clipping point, which was 42. Now, when we look at that volume, or that signal, again, we have volume, we have signal present, but you can clearly see that there's quite a bit missing here. This is not going to be a super impressive aftermarket amp and subsystem if this is the signal I have to work with. So in this case, I'm going to use an LC2i Pro rather than using the built-in high to low converter built into my aftermarket amplifier. And the reason I'm going to do that is for Accubase. Accubase is how we're going to solve this problem. So Accubase is going to allow us to basically compensate for this rolled off bass. Now, when you're doing this, there's a couple things to take into consideration. First, the Accubase section is right here on top. And the first thing I want to do is set my level to 12 o'clock. So I'm going to just put that straight up and down, just like that. Okay, so I'm just going to start there as a preliminary step. The next thing I want to do is adjust my threshold, and I want to do this slowly. And when I say slowly, I mean really slowly. Because Accubase does have a slight delay built into it intentionally, we want to make sure that we do this slow enough to where we can actually see Accubase engage. Now, there's an LED here that's going to show you when it's engaged. If you were to watch the screen at the same time, what you'll notice is as soon as that LED turns on, you'll also see the signal on the RTA reflect that change. So I'm going to very, very slowly turn up my Accubase threshold. Keep going, keep going. Probably getting close. Okay, so as soon as that light comes on, you can see we have definitely restored a lot of bass down here in the lower frequencies. Now that you've figured out where your threshold point is, I can now take my level and adjust this and see how much do I want to boost some of these frequencies. Do I really want to make it have a super heavy low end? That might be a little much. Or do I want to just barely fill this in so that it's flat? Now remember, this is essentially what we started with. That's level all the way down on Accubase. I'm going to just bring this up until we fill in these lower frequencies. And something right around there looks pretty good. Now, one of the ways you can verify that you've set up AccuBase correctly is twofold. One, if you have an RTA connected like I do, I just have the output of the LC2i Pro connected to the input of my DM-RTA. That's an easy way to do it. Alternatively, I could just turn down the volume knob on here. And again, I told you there was a delay. If I turn the volume knob down on my factory radio, we're going to see that AccuBase LED went out. Now, as we increase the volume, we're going to look for that LED to turn on right around volume 42. So there I've hit 42 and takes just a second and AccuBase re-engage. So that shows me that I have it set at basically the perfect place. Now, I'm using volume 42 in this scenario because this is a demonstration. What you'd really want to do is make sure that you're setting that threshold to the volume where the bass rolls off. So if there's a certain volume point on your factory radio where you just notice that, hey, every time I exceed volume 20, the bass kind of doesn't get any louder, well, then you would want to do this same process, but at that volume level. So now that we've finished that, the one last thing that I usually do in this scenario is just take a look at the level output of my LC2i Pro. Now, I'm not going to change anything. All I'm really going to do is go over to my voltage meter and take a look at what we have. We know our signal is good, but do we have enough output? So while doing this same test, everything at the same level, I'm going to increase the level output on my 2i Pro. And I'm going to essentially make it match whatever the amplifier can handle. So if I need to turn this thing up all the way because I've got a super weak incoming signal, well, here we go. Now I've got a good solid 3.5 to 4 volt signal coming out of this 2i Pro. That signal is going to be equal or better than what comes out of a lot of aftermarket radios. So there you have it. We took you through the steps of verifying your signal on your factory radio, making adjustments to it, checking it for clipping, checking that you have the signal you need, and correcting those issues using an LC2i Pro with AccuBase. And now we have a signal coming out of our 2i Pro that we could feed right into an aftermarket amp, and all we do is set our gains, and away we go.